The Willowbrook Cemetery had been abandoned for 13 years, ever since the last groundskeeper, Samuel Crane, disappeared on a moonless October night, leaving behind only his lantern still burning beside an open grave. Now, Thomas Reed stood at the rusted gates with his new employer's keys, hired to restore the forgotten graveyard to its former dignity. Nobody stays past sunset, the town clerk had warned him, pressing the keys into his palm with trembling fingers. Just do your work during daylight and leave before the shadows grow long. Thomas had laughed then. He didn't laugh now, standing before the gates as morning mist clung to crooked headstones like ghostly shrouds. The cemetery sprawled across 7 acres of hillside, its graves dating back 3 centuries. Ancient oaks twisted toward the gray sky, their roots bulging through the earth, disturbing coffins that should have remained buried. He pushed through the gates, which groaned like a dying man's last breath. The main path was overgrown with black thorn bushes that seemed to reach for him with barbed fingers. Every step forward felt like walking deeper into a mouth that was slowly closing. His first task was to clear the old caretaker's cottage near the cemetery's heart. The small stone building squatted among the graves like a cancer, its windows black with grime, its door hanging askew. Thomas found Samuel Crane's belongings exactly as he'd left them, a half-eaten meal moldering on the table, clothes laid out on the bed, and on the wall, hundreds of photographs of graves, each marked with red ink, moving, speaking empty. The diary lay open on the desk, its final entry dated October 31st, 13 years ago. They're not staying down anymore. The earth rejects them, pushes them up like splinters from infected flesh. I hear them walking at night, searching for what they've lost. Tonight I follow them down. God forgive me. I must know what lies beneath. Thomas shuddered but convinced himself it was the ramblings of a man gone mad from isolation. He began his work, clearing weeds and straightening headstones. But as the day wore on, he noticed things that made his skin crawl. Graves that should have been sunken with age were mounded with fresh earth. Scratches on the inside of unearthed coffin lids. Children's toys left on graves that predated their invention by decades. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Thomas discovered the oldest section of the cemetery, where headstones bore dates from the 1600s. Here the air grew thick and cold, and sounds became muffled as if cotton filled his ears. The graves were arranged in a perfect spiral pattern, all facing inward toward a central mausoleum that wasn't on any map. The mausoleum door bore no name, only symbols that hurt to look at directly. The massive stone door stood slightly ajar, darkness visible through the gap like a vertical pupil. From within came a smell, sweet rot mixed with burnt herbs and something else, something alive and waiting. Thomas backed away, but his foot caught on something. Looking down, he found a human rib cage partially buried, grass growing through it, then another, and another. A trail of bones led from various graves to the mausoleum, as if the dead had crawled from their resting places toward that black door. The sun touched the horizon, painting the cemetery blood red. Thomas ran for the gates, but the path had changed. Graves stood where none had been before. The cottage was gone, replaced by a gaping hole in the earth. The gates seemed to recede with each step forward. Then he heard it. The sound of earth moving, shifting, breathing. All around him the ground began to bulge and crack. Fingers gray and worm-eaten pushed through the soil. Heads emerged, dirt falling from empty sockets, mouths opening in silent screams. They pulled themselves up with terrible patience, their bodies wrong, too tall, joints bending in impossible directions, some crawling on all fours like spiders. But these weren't the true horror. The true horror stood among them. Samuel Crane, 13 years dead, his groundskeeper uniform hanging in tatters. His eyes were gone, replaced by writhing darkness. When he spoke, soil poured from his mouth. You should have heeded the warning. The cemetery chooses its keeper, and the keeper feeds the spiral. The dead moved as one mass, herding Thomas toward the mausoleum. He could see now what lay within, not a tomb, but a throat, a massive gullet lined with tombstones like teeth, descending into depths that defied architecture. At its edge he saw other groundskeepers from decades past, all standing guard, all eyeless, all smiling. Every cemetery needs a heart, Samuel explained, his voice like grinding stone. Ours has been hungry for so long. We feed it loneliness, fear, fresh grief, but sometimes it needs something more substantial. Thomas tried to run, but the dead were everywhere, their cold hands pushing him forward. The mausoleum's throat pulsed, eager, waiting. He could hear whispers rising from below, promises of eternal service, of becoming one with the cemetery itself, of understanding what death truly meant. At the threshold, Thomas grabbed the doorframe, fighting against the tide of corpses. His fingers found purchase on one of the symbols, and suddenly he could see everything. The cemetery wasn't just a burial ground, it was a living entity, a parasite that had grown fat on death and grief for centuries. Every grave was a root, every corpse a nutrient, every mourner's tear a drop of sustenance. The spiral pattern wasn't random, it was a summoning circle, carved into the earth itself, designed to draw something up from depths that predated human memory. Samuel and the other groundskeepers were antibodies, ensuring the thing below stayed fed and dormant. Without a keeper, it would rise, spreading its influence beyond the cemetery walls, turning the entire town into a necropolis.
There is no escape.
Choose, Samuel
Only
said.
a choice.
Serve or be consumed. There is no leaving now that you've seen. Thomas looked at the waiting darkness, then at the army of dead. He thought of the town beyond the gates, innocent and unaware. With trembling hands he released the doorframe and spoke the words that Samuel whispered to him, ancient words that tasted of earth and ending. The transformation was agony. His eyes burst like overripe fruit, replaced by something that could see beyond the veil. His flesh grew cold, then numb, then forgotten. He felt the cemetery's consciousness merge with his own, every grave a nerve ending, every headstone a tooth, every buried corpse a memory. When dawn came, Thomas Reed stood at the gates, keys in hand, waiting. The dead had returned to their graves, the mausoleum door sealed once more. He understood now. The cemetery needed a groundskeeper not to tend the dead, but to tend the living, to ensure they came, grieved and fed the spiral with their sorrow. A car approached, a family in black, carrying flowers and tears. Thomas opened the gates with a smile that wasn't quite human anymore. "Welcome to Willowbrook Cemetery," he said, his voice carrying the echo of earth and stone. "I'll be your groundskeeper. Please follow me. I know exactly where your loved one rests." As they walked among the graves, Thomas noticed how the shadows followed them, hungry and patient. Tonight, after they left, he would check the mausoleum, ensure the seals held, and listen to the whispers from below. The cemetery had its keeper, and the keeper had his purpose. In the caretaker's cottage, a new diary lay open, its first entry reading, "Day 1, the graves are speaking again." The spiral turns, the heart beats on. I understand now what Samuel meant. We don't guard the living from the dead. We guard the living from what the dead are becoming. Outside, the cemetery waited, patient as stone, hungry as the void, and Thomas Reed, no longer entirely human, stood watch over the thin boundary between what was buried and what should never rise. But sometimes, on moonless nights, even he wondered what would happen when the cemetery finally had enough groundskeepers. When every grave was filled, every tear shed, every mourner fed to the spiral. What was it summoning from below, and why did it sometimes sound like laughter? The answer lay beneath the mausoleum, in chambers that predated the cemetery, where something vast and patient counted the days until its harvest was complete. And Thomas Reed, the last groundskeeper of Willowbrook Cemetery, would stand guard until that final day, neither living nor dead, forever feeding the darkness that fed on grief itself.